that goes around, you lose $1,000.
But is it all a lot of hot air or the new future for the US power industry? And what impact will America's stance have on the rest of the world and the move to green energy? We'll get the view from the chief executive of the American Clean Power Association, the big boss of global renewable energy producer and Europe's largest, Statkraft, and the chief product officer of battery and panel suppliers, SolarWatt. Plus, what's it like trying to build a wind farm amid all this uncertainty? We'll speak to the director of Source Energy. They're doing just that on land and at sea, around Ireland and the UK. Wherever you're watching, welcome to Talking Business. Now, it's no big secret that President Trump is not a friend of the net zero movement. Railing against moves to cleaner energy, he's stepped up his campaign to exploit fossil fuels with that mantra, drill, baby, drill. He's also targeted what he calls the green scam. Speaking at this year's World Economic Forum, President Trump lambasted European leaders for their pursuit of clean power.
Because of my landslide election victory, the United States avoided the catastrophic energy collapse which befell every European nation that pursued the Green New Scam, perhaps the greatest hoax in history. There are windmills all over Europe. There are windmills all over the place, and they are losers. One thing I've noticed is that the more windmills a country has, the more money that country loses and the worse that country is doing.
But while the rhetoric has been seen as a change in policy at the White House, the clean energy megatrend seems hard to stop. Even though the US has quit the UN Climate Treaty and the Paris Agreement, that it's rolling back on clean energy tax incentives and blocking wind and solar projects, the numbers show green energy still very much on the rise. The latest data from the US government's own energy forecaster predicts energy output from fossil fuels will slide over the next 2 years. Now, that's been driven by a near 10% fall in coal power generation. Renewables, though, step in, with solar power expected to increase by 46%, and wind, the main target for President Trump's ire, growing by 12%. And it could all be down to cost. Advances in technology and years of investment have seen the cost of renewable energy fall sharply compared to fossil fuels. One major consultancy says producing electricity from wind and solar is now significantly cheaper than coal and gas. But it's not all plain sailing. Renewable energy isn't always guaranteed. The wind needs to blow and the sun needs to shine, and that raises questions over reliability. That's something the Trump administration has highlighted to the world and prompted international political concern for that push to green energy. Nonetheless, the green energy transition continues to gain force around the world. In the first half of last year, renewable energy sources overtook coal as the world's leading source of electricity for the first time. Major moves like Europe's North Sea Wind Investment Pact may further cement the trend, while recent court rulings in the US have seen construction restarted on some wind farms after being shuttered by the Trump administration. And so for more on the transformation of the US energy industry, I caught up with the boss of the American Clean Power Association. Jason Grumet, welcome to Talking Business. Good to have you here. And talk to me about some of that rhetoric we've heard from the White House of late. Is it a problem, what we've heard from President Trump and this administration when it comes to reducing carbon emissions?
Well, Ben, it's great to be with you. And, look, the fact that the administration is betting against a key part of the American economy is unfortunate. We're kind of in a Charles Dickens moment, right? It's kind of the best of times and the worst of times for clean energy. The economic fundamentals have never been stronger. We're finding, that the kind of price competition of clean energy is, very good. The demand is driving a lot of clean energy. So the desire in the economy for significant decarbonization and the technologies that provide it, very strong. But the politics have never been worse. We definitely have now an administration that's taken an ideological approach to the American economy in a way that is undermining the ability to bring as much clean energy online as we otherwise could. And that is slowing the decarbonization. But I will tell you that it's inexorable. When the fundamentals of energy policy clash with the politics, the fundamentals always do prevail. It's just a question of how much unnecessary harm happens in the meantime.
And there are two key ambitions here, aren't there? One is making sure there is enough energy to go around, and we know the world is consuming more power than ever before. At the other side, there is that desire to reduce emissions and to protect the climate. Do you find it perverse that the White House is so anti-green energy right now, if we believe what we hear from the president, when actually all energy is needed, whether it comes from fossil fuels or whether it's renewable energy, it is still needed?
Well, Ben, that is the insight that is going to vindicate the interest of clean energy and all energy. Demand is increasing at a manner that we've not seen in decades, right? We predict about a 30% increase in energy demand just in the next decade. It's being driven by the AI revolution, but also just the onshoring of additional manufacturing here in the U.S. And that kind of economic growth is a very good thing. The president, as a candidate and in his first administration, was kind of an all-of-the-above energy advocate. And what we're seeing on the ground is that the efforts to take energy away from the American people are causing prices to spike. This is not complicated economics. If demand is soaring and you're limiting supply, the result is pain for consumers. Ultimately, that is what we believe will force the White House, as it has forced prior administrations, to take a more balanced approach.
And is that why we've seen, despite everything that this administration has said, some of those climate commitments it's pulled back from, some of the rhetoric around renewed interest in fossil fuels, we're still seeing renewable energy projects gain funding, get off the ground and grow, and the proportion of energy in the US that's coming from renewables is growing all the time, despite what the White House may say.
Yeah, so look, again, it's economics fundamentally drive energy policy, and presidents can assert their preferences and presidents can slow things down, but the reality is that energy policy takes a while to flow through the system. These are not computer apps, right? These are projects that take many years, billions of dollars, and decades to build, and the momentum in the system in the US is for clean power. So 90% of the projects that are waiting to be connected to the grid are coming from renewable energy.
Would you say it was a mistake by the climate campaigners to say that energy is about either or? It's either fossil fuels or renewables, when actually, as you've touched on there, the argument is that we all need more energy regardless of where it comes from. And then the economics make the case for it to be renewables over fossil fuels.
Yeah, look, the polarization in energy policy has harmed the American economy. I think the climate advocacy community tends to be very good at being against things. It's easier to organize emotion around opposition than affirmation. And the efforts around, leave energy in the ground, the assertion that we should have 100% clean, renewable grid by 2035, were just not realistic. And I think they fed into now the polarization on the right. We now have, again, this unfortunate pendulum swinging back and forth every 4 and sometimes 8 years, which makes it very difficult to run a complex economy. You can really undermine a supply chain in 4 years, but you can't create the next one. And so, we've got to find a way, and the U.S. Congress is actually now somewhat motivated because they're hearing from the clean energy sector, the oil and gas sector, and the nuclear sector all saying the same thing, which is you've got to back off and let the economy provide the energy that the country needs.
Now, we've talked a lot, though, about the economics here, about it makes financial sense because this stuff is cheaper and it's easier to get up and running and it's more efficient. But we know that so much of this isn't about economics, it's about politics. And I wonder, therefore, whether this is about President Trump's on-off trade war with China, a seeming over-reliance on some other Asian economies, particularly in the green energy space, because they are manufacturing most of the components that are needed.
So the supply chain, particularly around solar power, is problematic. I think many advanced technologies in the U.S. are relying on critical aspects of the Chinese economy for our own success, whether it's the processing of critical minerals or the construction of solar panels. China made a very intentional decision, like a centralized economy can, to become the leaders in clean energy manufacturing. Ironically, the U.S. was fighting back effectively under the prior policies. There were significant incentives for domestic manufacturing of clean energy, and about 100 different domestic manufacturing facilities that opened up in the prior administration with that incentive. That has now slowed down. And so I think that there's got to be a real reckoning. It took 20 years for the U.S. to sacrifice its supply chain to China. It's going to take, 5 or 6 of, intentional policy to bring it back.
Jason Grumet, really good to have you on the programme. Thanks for being with us this week, Chief Executive of the American Clean Power Association. Thank you.
Good to be with you.
So how is all of this feeding through to the big decisions from the renewable energy companies? I spoke with the Chief Executive of Europe's largest generator of renewable energy, Statkraft. Birgitta Vatndal, thank you for being on the programme with us today. And let's start first of all with how you would assess the state of the industry right now. Is it a good time to be doing what you do?
So we do definitely see a continued strong build out of renewable energy across Europe and also globally. What we call mature technologies like wind, solar, and batteries are the technologies that are competitive and where we see an economic driving force. So there are many opportunities in this space.
We'll talk about what we've heard from the United States maybe in a moment, but where do you see the real opportunity for growth right now?
So for us, we focus on Europe and South America, and these are both markets where we see significant opportunities. But we shouldn't forget China, the growth that we see in China, and also other Asian markets where the opportunities for build-outs are significant as well.
Yes, and when we look at what's therefore happened in the United States, the rhetoric changing at the White House, President Trump calling it a big green scam. How damaging is that to this move towards net zero and these really ambitious targets for the world to hit them?
We see that mature technologies like wind, solar, and batteries, there is an underlying economic sense to invest in these technologies. It's cheaper to invest in new renewable technologies than it is to invest in fossil fuel. So despite some of the rhetoric that we observe and some of the challenges that we observe, we see that the economic forces are driving renewables. And as an example, even in the US, we have seen growth in solar. Then you could say that some areas, like how Mr. Trump is acting on offshore wind, is negative for renewables. But overall, there are other countries, other continents, China, Europe, South America, that are driving the trends in a positive direction.
Yes, and I wonder, therefore, what impact that has on a business like yours. Does it mean that you pivot elsewhere, or you have to maybe work a little bit harder to educate people, inform people about the benefits of what you do?
There is misinformation or other views that we also have to work with to talk about how we see the renewables being deployed, how that over time will bring down cost for consumers, how it will, for instance, lead to that Europe will have more energy security, being less dependent on imports. And also, although it's not talked about these days, we shouldn't forget that we also need to combat climate change. And renewable is also a strong contribution in that aspect.
Collaboration and cooperation is really key here, isn't it? Particularly when it comes to renewables, because of maybe the difficulty in storing all of that power and not being able to use it when it's generated. That recent deal in the North Sea, meaning that all of those signatories can share the energy that will be created from those new wind farms. How much of a game changer is a project like that?
Well, I think the importance, as you point to, is to have a strong infrastructure across Europe so that we can share. Some areas of Europe will generate power at one point in time, others at another point in time. In addition to have storage, in Norway we are lucky to have hydropower. In the UK we are building out batteries. In Germany it's still gas power that you need to add to kind of balance the grid. But reducing those bottlenecks, increasing the availability of power across, is critical. So we need to cooperate across our countries in order to have a solid system for everyone.
You touched on energy security, and it is such an important issue, of course, thrown into the spotlight after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, reducing dependency on Russian oil and therefore the wider picture of reducing dependency on fossil fuels. This is going to become a national security issue as well as just an energy security issue, isn't it?
For sure. We have seen that Europe has been dependent, on your point, on Russian gas. We are also currently importing a lot of gas from the US. If we build out renewable power across Europe, in many instances, we are, of course, buying the equipment, for instance, from China. But once this has been installed, we will have locally generated power that reduce our dependence on fossil fuel on other countries and increases our own energy security. And this has been an important driver also for the European Union in pushing the build out of renewable over the last few years after the invasion to Ukraine.
How difficult is it to make these big long-term investments if there is a change of leadership and a change in policy?
When we do investments in renewables, it's a lifetime of 40 years and maybe up to 60, 70 years if it's hydropower. And then as investors, we are dependent on consistency and that governments and others stick to their promises and the contracts that we make. This is a risk that we see across our countries and that we have to manage. For me as a CEO, it's very much about not placing every eggs in one basket, but kind of spreading our bets a bit, trying to understand the risk in the various countries. At the same time, to invest in technologies that we believe are financially viable also in their own sense and that we can manage over many years. But it's an important element, and I think it's important for politicians to be mindful of the risk that businesses see in this area.
Birgitte Vardahl, really good to have you on the programme with us this week. Thank you.
Thank you.
So away from the numbers, how is all of this feeding through to the rest of us? Well, you may have a solar panel on your roof or be toying with the idea for your business. But is it really a wise investment? Well, one company that's been installing renewable technology for over 30 years is SolarWatt. And I caught up with its Chief Product Officer. Peter Bachmann, welcome to Talking Business. Good to have you here. And I wonder, everything we've heard in recent weeks and months, the White House calling green energy a scam. What does it mean for a business like yours? What are your customers telling you?
It's complete nonsense, to be honest, and I think we really should focus here what we can do in Europe. And to be honest, green electricity or renewable energy, it's really the cleanest energy we can provide and also the cheapest. So I think we should really focus on what we can do here.
And talk me through the process, because I think it's fair to say some people might have an outdated perception of what a solar panel on your roof can do, maybe what a wind turbine in your back garden can do. The efficiency and the cost of these things has changed dramatically, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. In the last 3 years, I would say solar costs or the cost of a solar system have decreased by almost 90%. So it's really the cheapest energy you can get everywhere. We are talking here about 4.5 pence per kilowatt hour compared to energy from your outlet where you pay 20 to 30 pence per kilowatt hour. So it's really cheap. It's very affordable. And the technology is very much advanced for the solar panels, but also for batteries and everything around it.
Now, dispel a myth for me here. You know, I'm talking to you from London. We don't get a lot of sun, usually, but it doesn't always need to be sunny for solar panels to work. Is that right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. I'm also here in London today, and if I look outside, it's rainy and we do not have sunshine today, but nevertheless, solar panels are producing energy every day. And of course, in the midterm, you also have your battery to store the energy. So even in winter times, the solar panels are producing energy. So it's always a good investment.
Now, one of the big drivers, of course, has been China, because it's new technology, so that's brought down prices, it's increased efficiency. But do you get a sense that the world is a bit too reliant on China when it comes to renewable energy technology?
First of all, you're right. I mean, 90% of solar panels and everything is coming from China by now, but also the raw material just before the finished goods. And I think Chinese has done it or played it very brilliantly over the last 10 to 15 years because they really wanted to dominate this industry. And to be honest, I think we in Europe should have taken the same decision a couple of years ago, but there was not that much of government support. So at the moment, we have to find the right partners in China because nevertheless, we need the panels in order to drive down CO2 footprint in Europe and so on.
So there is still a long way to go for Europe to catch up with the sort of scale and efficiency and crucially on cost.
Yes, I think it is. But we have shown in the past we've been there. We've been, especially in Germany, we've been the first ones back at the beginning of 2000s. We had the big factories ourselves, and then we somehow lost to China. But as said before, we still have the know-how. We could still do it. And if we really want to have it as a society, as an economy, as Europe in a total, I think it would be still doable.
Peter Bachmann, really good to talk to you on the programme this week. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's been a pleasure.
Now, the UK, along with 8 other European countries, has signed up to work together to develop a vast new fleet of offshore wind projects in the North Sea. A project that will see, for the first time, wind farms linked to multiple countries, all in an effort to lower prices. It's an ambitious undertaking that will involve vast amounts of planning and cooperation. But just how do you pick where you put the turbines? And just how difficult is it to get from a plan to pumping out power? For more, I spoke to the co-founder and director of the renewable developers, Source Energy. Garrett Morrison, welcome to Talking Business. It's good to have you here. And let's talk about some of the logistics. How do you even start to plan infrastructure development like this?
Ben, thank you. Nice to be on. Thank you for being invited to contribute to the edition. Very good question. How do we start planning a project such as an offshore wind project? You may believe or otherwise that if you look out at the sea, there's an abundance of area that you could potentially site a development such as an offshore wind farm, which is not the case. The early stages of identifying an appropriate area is what we call site identification and early screening. And what this means is we ultimately carry out a really detailed screening process under a constraints mapping exercise, where we have to identify where there are shipping lanes, navigational lanes, where there's potentially conflicts with other users of the seabed, with fisheries, with marine, with the military. And very soon, when you build up a map which shows those constraints, you will quickly realize that there's not a lot of area out there that's capable of housing an offshore wind farm at the scale of what they are.
And so you've identified the site, you think this place will be good, it's accessible, you can get the kit there that you need. What sort of timescales are we talking about here? How long does it take to turn that from a site into a production facility?
Again, at the best case scenario, we are looking as a developer, we would look at that as possibly having a 10 to 15 year period between site identification and running through the various work streams or work packages which is involved in developing such projects to say FID and then into construction and energization. That could be a 15-year period, and that's me being very optimistic with those timelines because we are faced with considerable challenges along the way, mainly focusing on things like consenting, planning, grid, which is a huge constraint at the moment, especially in the UK, but ultimately across all markets. And then the supply chain itself, the procurement of the equipment, is also something which is quite challenging at the moment.
And when you're talking about those sorts of timescales, how important is it that you have stability in policy? Because I imagine you will go through a number of different governments, you'll go through a number of different iterations of what policy might be for green energy or renewables. Is there such thing as sort of consistency when it comes to making these long-term investments?
As a developer, we would love to have a very stable political outlook in terms of such projects. In fairness, the majority of the governments have committed to developing such strong, as I say, clear, concise plans for offshore wind. I think in the UK we can be very proud of the developments which have happened to date. In fact, the UK has the largest offshore wind fleet in the world. They currently have a 15, 16 gigawatt fleet of offshore wind projects, and that is growing fast.
And I wonder, we talked about sentiment and consistency of policy. How damaging is what we've seen maybe from the White House and some of the rhetoric coming from President Trump about the move to net zero and that green energy transition? Does it change what's happening on the ground? Or is that just a lot of hot air coming out of the White House?
I believe it's a temporary blip in the US, to be perfectly honest with you. Personally, I think it's helped galvanize what has happened here in Europe. I think you only have to look at what's happened quite recently in Hamburg, where we have a lot of the Northern European countries coming together to sign the Hamburg Accord. And ultimately what that means is there's a commitment there at a government level across all of the European countries to work together to develop vast amounts of offshore wind.
Garrett Morrison, really good to have you on the programme this week. Thanks for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
That's all for this week. There's more on the global economy on the BBC News website and app. But until next time, thanks for watching, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.